My friends, good day. Once again, here's some news that should have been on the front page of the newspapers, but it isn't. Germany has just betrayed France by deciding to subsidize energy for its industries starting in 2026. In a context where France is forced by the European Union, in other words, forced by Germany, to artificially raise the price of its energy. So France produces hydroelectric energy and nuclear energy. Normally, the energy issue in France should have been resolved once and for all. That means it's a country that had solved this equation. How are we going to supply households? How are we going to supply our industry? Normally, this is no longer a question that France should be asking itself today. Normally, it would be literally electricity should be to France what oil is to Saudi Arabia. That means a commodity that would be provided almost for free, right? And then it would allow people to work, create jobs, keep industries running, and also to export, have a positive trade balance, attract investments, and attract innovators. You see, well, all of that, right? All of that. Unfortunately, Germany said no. Because France, after the end of the Second World War, had this obsession with creating what we call the Franco-German couple. This couple only exists in the mind of France. On the German side, they don't have this vocabulary. Germany isn't in a couple with anyone. You see, it's a bit like if I told you, here I'm in a relationship with Miss Argentina. Well, it would be better if Miss Argentina confirmed that I'm in a relationship with her. But France thinks she's in a relationship with Germany, and so she submits. One example of this submission, for instance, is that a few years ago, the destruction of Fessenheim, a nuclear plant that still had some life ahead of it, was carried out. It wasn't destroyed for operational reasons, age, or problems. No, it was destroyed purely for ideological reasons. They decided to destroy it, to tear it down, and that's it. And now we are committed to dependence. Another thing is that France links the price within the framework of the European Common Market. It links the price of electricity to that of gas. So it has a somewhat complicated mechanism. I can't give you a direct mathematical formula. It's not like that. But in reality, what they're going to do is create a fairly complex mechanism to determine the price of electricity. And in that, they're going to include, with an extremely strong weighting, the most expensive European power plant. And typically, these are plants that operate gas. So somewhere, even though we have like Électricité de France Florent, the world's energy, etc. Well, somewhere, we're going to take a gas station lost somewhere. And then that one becomes the main indexer. This one determines the price of energy in France. And so artificially, what happens? France inflates its energy, and in the process, what does it do? It attaches an external circuit to it. It's extremely complicated, with subcontractors and companies that are there just for the sake of commensality. That means companies that don't add any value, they don't produce electricity, they don't transport it, nothing at all. They insert themselves into the system, latch on and siphon value for shareholders. Out of thin air, these companies turn nothing into money, into cold, hard cash at the expense of the country. So the idea is that in France we have deindustrialization, despite everything you might hear. Macron, yes, I want to protect the industry. But let me tell you something. If Macron tells you he's going to protect something, just start mourning that thing right away. So the reindustrialization of France, a term you hear from time to time in the media, is an illusion. It doesn't exist. If there are any numbers, they're fake. It's simply something that's not happening. On the contrary, industries are being shut down, which leads to outsourcing. Because when an industry closes, France, the people who are the carbon witnesses, they're very happy. They say, yes, you see, it's great. Yes, these carbon witnesses exist, but people on Earth still need these products. When an industry closes in France, it will open in India, China, Sri Lanka, or elsewhere. Simply put, what leaves with it? Direct and indirect jobs leave, investments leave, intellectual property, research, and everything else leave. And in the long run, it's going to create an increasingly negative balance, a trade balance for France. And also a country that produces nothing, that is dependent and increasingly forced to go into debt, paying more and more for things. It can't produce them due to a lack of energy, even though it actually has energy. But between its energy, between itself and its energy, there is this ideological curtain that becomes more and more impassable as the days go by. So, what did Germany decide to do? Germany decided to do something quite bold. Well, starting next year, 2026, it will begin to subsidize the electricity it provides to its industries. So it's still pretty aggressive coming from a country that pushed others to deindustrialize. And then, which itself, by the way, destroyed all its energy supply, including its nuclear plants, which were blown up. Well, today, that country says, okay, we're going to finance, we're going to sponsor, or we're going to subsidize energy for our industries. Well, this, of course, is a slap in the face. It's a betrayal for France, that's clear. France, which followed this story and ultimately this country, a country without direction, running everywhere. And now, today, it finds itself having destroyed its industry, facing Germany, which is injecting liquidity to finance its own industry. You see, well, now Germany is not going to take it to paradise. I'll tell you why, because here's what's happening. The thing is, the price of electricity for households will remain high, but we're going to artificially sell electricity to German industries at a ridiculously low price. How are we going to do that? Through a subsidy. In other words, it will be German households who, through their bills and also through their taxes, will have to subsidize large industries. In other words, it's a transfer of wealth from ordinary people, from households, to the shareholders of large industrial groups. Do you see why? Because Germany is not solving a structural problem, because it really has a structural problem. Its problem is that it doesn't have energy. All of that is over. German industry is dead and finished. You see, it's a toxic asset. Before, it used to get energy from Russia, but now it no longer has access to that. It had nuclear power plants, but destroyed them for ideological reasons. It has to run coal power plants. It has to bring in shale gas from the United States by having it cross the Atlantic and paying for the trip. So, with these measures, it's a very industrialized country, but it no longer has access to energy. So, what will the state do? It will inject billions artificially to keep the industry running just as artificially. But that's not sustainable. That's just perpetuating a system that should normally go bankrupt tomorrow. And instead of letting the system go bankrupt tomorrow, well, we're going to inject cash. And the day we run out of cash, well, it's going to collapse. So, what Germany is doing is forcing its population to subsidize the industry. How long will it last? Not very long. Something else somewhere? It strongly reminds us, when we think about it, it reminds us of 2008, 2008. What happened? There was a collapse of financial capitalism, of the banks in the United States, initially, but later. Contagion spread almost everywhere due to interconnected systems. What happened? Well, banks started to collapse. And then people started calling for help, and the government came in and saved them. You remember back then, people used to say, too big to fail. These banks are too big to go bankrupt. We can't allow that. So, what will we do? We're going to take taxpayers' money and share the losses. There you go. When you have bonuses, you distribute them among yourselves to your executives, to your shareholders, and all that, right? In dividends and everything. But when you make losses, don't worry, we'll come with the checkbook and we'll pay you. All right, you see what I mean is that's pure capitalism. You see, there are a lot of people who always associate state intervention and statism and all that with values that are contrary to capitalism. No, capitalism needs the state just as much as communism does or as socialism does. It's just that the needs come at different times. Capitalism wants freedom when it's preying on others, but the moment it makes bad deals, it runs to the state to demand money. You see, so I was saying that back then we said too big to fail for some banks, and we ended up saving those banks. Today, what about Germany? There is a collapse of its industrial capitalism. Just look at the state Audi is in, the state Volkswagen is in, and others that have already laid off workers and closed down, factories that are already running production units at partial capacity. You see, because they can't find outlets, because their production costs have skyrocketed compared to competitors like China, for example, which now surpasses them. So what happens then? They're about to go bankrupt. What does Germany do? They say too big to fail and it's too big to collapse. So what should we do? We're going to inject them with money. So since we can't inject them with cash directly, what do? We do it indirectly by telling them we'll lower your energy bill. So in a way, it's injecting money into the industry. In a way, it's a bailout of the industry by sharing its losses and operating costs. How long is this going to last? It's just to buy time. Because Germany is facing the rise of the AfD, you see, there's panic. There's complete panic following the rise of this Alternative for Germany party. And what the people in power want to do today is to tell themselves, we're going to try to calm things down to show that we're in control of the coming economic crisis, but they have no control at all. You can't save an industry that's structurally flawed, structurally in deficit. You can't save it with subsidies. That makes absolutely no sense. Do you know who did that? The Union of Soviet Socialist Republics tried that, but it didn't work. At one time, it wanted to save the industries, for example, in Cuba and other vassals. So was it to buy the alliance or to buy the loyalty of certain vassals? It bought industrial products from them in convertible rubles, so it would go and buy products from them. Stuff that was useless, overpriced, and of poor quality. It bought them just to save their industry and keep it afloat. And in return, it got Camelot that was useless, you see. And the reality is that Germany is doing exactly the same thing. It wants to save its industries, but you can't save an industry when the market isn't there, when there's no room for it, especially after destroying your energy supply. Without energy, there's no industry or work. Quite simply, all right, there you go, my friends. So we'll see how this all turns out, how it's all going to play out. But well, it's quite worrying. And now France finds itself stuck in this situation, betrayed by Germany, which in any case will end up paying the price. It's just that Germany is just delaying the inevitable. That's all, because there's something else. I'll talk to you about that another time. It's late now. I'm nodding off. I'm about to fall asleep at 10 p.m. on this island. I'm showing you the book Astrology and recommend reading it because it explains that there are a lot of ideological mechanisms that led to the fall of France, that led to the fall of Germany. You should know that there are a number of things, ideologies that we hear about and all, that destroy work because they attack precisely the lifeblood of any civilization, which is its energy supply. And actually, if you want, these ideologies are translated into laws. Unfortunately, that means that, for example, I don't know, who remembers when Ségolène Royal was there and Nicolas Hulot, who remembers them? Do you remember Nicolas Hulot and Ségolène Royal in power as ministers? Do you remember that? I know some people remember. Can you give the date without Googling? You can't do it. It's too hard. These are people who just pass through. Literally, I almost want to say that in private messages. You see, they arrive, they disappear, it's over, they should fade into oblivion. Let me tell you, those people are still in power. Do you know why? Because they learned something. It's that they passed laws, enforceable laws. And that's something that was done in the United Kingdom, for example, by Blair. He was trained as a lawyer. They understood something when they came to power. And even if they only managed to stay for 15 days, during that time, they pass binding laws, either national laws or they sign international agreements that are just as binding. You see, so after they leave and retire, they're gone. What happens next? The laws they've left behind keep weighing down the economy. They keep creating an abnormal situation that forces many countries to undermine themselves. To obey this law, it's like having a law that forces you to become poor, a law that forces you to destroy your country. You see what I mean? So what France needs today is something quite huge. We're talking about something on the order of a revolution, and that would require the destruction of this entire legislative and bureaucratic arsenal, whether national or international, which is forcing the country to become poor. That's it. The law forces France into poverty, unemployment, misery, and insecurity. Destroying these future generations is a legal obligation. You see what I mean? I can't do otherwise. Anyway, thank you, my friends, for watching this video. Let me remind you about the book Astrology, which is available on Amazon in paperback and Kindle format, and one day it will even be available. It will be available on Audible in a few weeks. Many have asked me. See you soon, friends. We'll meet again.